Ladies and gentlemen, I am Tosh Berman, and this is Tosh Talks. Today, I want to talk about a composer who I just discovered very recently. In fact, the first time I heard his name mentioned, a friend of mine who is also on a previous Tea with Tosh show, Tom Rashawn, recommended him to me because he knows I'm a huge fan of Ennio Morricone's music, and it's all his soundtrack work as well as his experimental work he has done with the band Gruppo. And within this band Gruppo, Gruppo is a group of Italian composers, not just performers or musicians, but like 4 or 5 key Italian film composers in one group, Gruppo. And one of the musicians, composers in Gruppo is a guy named Egisto Macchi. Here's one of his albums. Now, to backtrack a little bit on Macchi and his world, there is a medium of music called library music, which I knew nothing about except I've heard the term used many times, and I know I have dear friends who are fascinated with that subject matter or that type of music. And what library music is, it's basically copyright-free record companies that only purpose is basically supply music to films and TV. So, for instance, if you're a producer of a movie, you pay a certain amount of money, and you get their entire catalog, and you can choose what music you want to use. It could be like mostly incidental music, or music for a chase scene, or a romantic scene, or a horror scene, most likely. So instead of hiring one composer to do the work, the producer will go to the library music company to select their music. And Egisto Macchi has done a lot of work for library music companies. He's also done at least 20 soundtrack albums, he did 20 movies, but I'm not really familiar with his specific soundtrack work. I only know his library music work, which meant that he composed, recorded, and made recordings for a particular company for the purpose of a producer or a movie company to come in and choose whatever they want to choose for their particular product or their film they're making. And one of the things interesting about library music composers, or that whole world, is that they do a lot of experimentation. Some could just be little cha-cha music or little boring incidental music, but some of these composers actually experiment with this form. And they have pretty much a free rein to do whatever they want in that format. But again, it is sold for, and cheaply, compared to hiring an actual composer to work specifically for your film. These, they're pretty much paid by, I don't know by the hour, but paid by the piece perhaps. And for a lot of the film composers, especially in Italy it seems like, and I think in Great Britain as well, there's a lot of composers and musicians who work for library music companies. And Egisto Macchi is totally fascinating to me because, one, his connection with Morricone, who I, as you know, or you should know, that I actually a huge fan of Morricone's work. The appeal of Morricone for me is basically his range is quite amazing. Probably most of you know Morricone through his spaghetti westerns he's done, and then maybe from some of the very lush scoring he did for like The Mission, for instance. It's a very famous soundtrack. But there's also a very much of an experimental aspect to Morricone as well. He is truly one of the great composers out of the 20th century, still alive. We're in the 21st century. I presume he's still doing great stuff. But Morricone has done lots of experimental recordings with Gruppo, who are basically, just, as I mentioned before, a band of 6 or 7 composers who do improvised music. only improvised music. And as I mentioned, Egisto Macchi is one of the members of Gruppo. Now, how do you compare Macchi's work with Morricone? There is a relationship. Morricone has worked with Macchi, not only within Gruppo, but also within Macchi's own recording projects. And they're very close friends. Macchi was born in the 20s, and he died sometime I think he died in 1995. And basically it's their friendship that I find very interesting, as well as how they work together within the Gruppo format, as well as Morricone working with Macchi on his particular recordings. And so anyway, I started listening to Macchi due to Tom Rochon's recommendation, but also to my great interest to Gruppo and Morricone recordings. And the first album I purchased by Macchi is Città in Notte, a collection of his library music. And I have to tell you one thing, there's a great label called the Omni Recording Corporation out of Australia. They release a lot of soundtrack work and a lot of library music titles. And everything they have done is superbly produced and designed incredibly well as kind of hard to find at times. They're all like limited editions of 500 copies or 600 copies, something like that. So if you do come upon it, you should buy it immediately, because they're all, what I've heard so far, pretty great. So Città in Notte is the first Egisto Macchi record I purchased. And the music here, Morricone is obviously on this album, because Morricone plays trumpet. He plays a trumpet, I would say not plays trumpet like a trumpet player, but more like what he does is he plays trumpet fart. He farts the trumpet sound more than Trump music. Trumpet music, not Trump the president. And so throughout the music on this album, you hear Morricone doing these music notes or pieces just through his trumpet playing. And some of the pieces on this are very lush, and some of it is very percussive, a lot of percussion, and very, very much experimental. It's very much borderline, sometimes ambient, but with a strong melody coming through. And you get the impression that it's something that, especially when I've heard of Macchi's music, you think you're hearing like some electronic music. It sounds electronic. But in all true honesty, it's basically done by real instruments. Mostly by strings of all sorts from an orchestration, like violin, viola, cello. You hear a piano, and you hear occasional electric guitar comes in the mix off and on. And it's almost sets a mode, a sort of a landscape of, sometimes it could be of tension, sometimes it could be something totally peaceful and totally like white, sort of like white meaning like there's nothing there in front of you. And that is sort of the beauty of his approach to music. And this one is actually an interesting album too. This is called Biorhythmi, all in Italian, and I can't speak Italian, and the way I pronounce words in foreign language is always terrible, so please forgive me for that, bear with that. But Biorhythmi is very, very, it's very thick, texture-wise, and sometimes when I listen to this music, I think of ants. I think of an ant colony working together, or insects, either bees or ants. It has that sort of rhythm of a factory going, like a factory noise, that's totally consistent, and it's quite, it's lush as well, but it's also very machine-like, but not human machine-like. It's almost like insects working together. This is an incredible album. But my favorite, and when I say it's my favorite, it only means it's my favorite just because of the mood I'm in, or when I listen to this album, it seems to fit my mood all the time. So, El Deserto by Macchi is quite a remarkable album. When I played it, it reminded me very much of Brian Eno's discrete music. And this album is very much, El Deserto, is very much an ambient album. It is ambient. But it's ambient done with some electronic sound or noise. But again, most of the instrumentation is all done by real instruments, meaning like a full orchestra, strings, piano, again, occasional guitar, some percussion. And this album has a very strong imagery of the desert. I'm not sure if it's about the desert, but I got a feeling or a sensibility that it deals with North Africa or like a North African, maybe somewhere in Morocco, like in the desert areas of Morocco. It has a North African touch to it. I almost feel like I'm listening to or reading a Paul Bowles story when I listen to his music. And this album doesn't have any liner notes, so I'm not sure what it's about. I think, again, this music was made for, again, producers to pick up on and to use it for whatever means they want to use it for. But when I listen to this on this as an album, I think of desert. I think of like a white sands, blue skies. Very rarely have I heard a record that gives me such a visual pictures in my mind that's so vivid. Without reading any liner notes saying this is what it is, because I don't know what it is. But to me, it's very much like a desert. And again, I bring up discrete music by Eno because it has the same rhythm as discrete music. And it's just as ambient as discrete music. This album's good when you play it kind of not loud, but mid-tempo to low volume. Mid-volume, low volume. And he is totally a remarkable composer. And now I'm thinking like, okay, Morricone, to me, is like the greatest composer of the 20th century, but now I'm thinking maybe Macchi is also the greatest composer of the 20th century. And you can, there's copyright issues with YouTube where you can't play music not licensed. So if you go through YouTube, you will find his music. Just look under his name and you'll find a lot of examples of his works in various formats or different type of moods. And I suspect that Macchi is a composer who has a huge scope and lots of music out there. But as a music listener, as I am, and as a fan I am, I'm going to have to dig very deep into him to locate, to find his work. And I shall do so. And I suggest you join me on this journey to listen to Egisto Macchi's music and recordings. And if you like what I do, and I can't imagine you're not liking what I do because I do really do pretty well, if you agree with me or not. So do subscribe to my channel, my YouTube channel, and I'll be coming to you very shortly. Especially if you subscribe to me, I'll come to your home. This is Tosh of Tosh Talks.